I'm Julia Noyes. I'm your instructor for the watercolor class. So this is lesson number 2. So don't forget, this is my name, and no emails, just texting. Texting is easy, texting is fast. Here's my phone number, 402-615-2789. You could photo text that to yourself. So please text only. And if you have some questions, make sure you identify yourself and what class that you're in so I know how to respond to you. So for lesson number 2, our theme is water. Water is number 2. So for this, just as a little reminder, you will be always doing a thumbnail sketch. So here is the handout on water. And you can see that this little thumbnail sketch is just a little miniature sketch. Tells me what you're thinking. So you do that to start with, and you actually get a point for this. And in this, you can see the techniques you're going to be using. So maybe you can zoom in on this and really see this. So these do refer to our book, but with the demonstrations, you'll be able to see what these techniques are very easily. So don't worry about that. And then this is actually how this is going to be graded. So anyone could come in and actually grade your work. You know, for example, you get a point if it's handed in on time. 1 point. You get a point if it demonstrates these techniques. You get a point if it has a focal point, and that means the focal point is like the leader of the band. It's the thing we look at, it's the top-notch thing. It's not, you know, the edges or things that aren't very important. Number 4, you get a point if it feels like a completed painting. Does it feel finished? Does it look complete? Okay, and does it go off 3 edges? So for example, with this painting right here, this little sketch, okay, I need to have it go off this edge, the water goes off this edge, the water goes off this edge. That would count 3 edges. By just having the sky blue, that doesn't count as an edge. I'm actually talking about something, some object, some shape actually goes off the edge. So you get a point for that. And does it feel like it's not a copy of somebody else's work? It's fine to use the internet, but I really want you to come up with something on your own, something that you like, which ties into number 7. Does it reflect something about you? You know, if you love water, and you love sailing, you love the ocean, you love a glass of water, you like to look at a still life. It could be any form of water. It could be a drop of water. It could be a rain scene. Anything to do with water is going to fit for this technique. And does it have value? And what I mean by value, does it have dark darks and light lights? So when we talk about value, it's not, this is $100. It means, does it have dark darks and light lights in it? And does it have line? You know, have you included line? And is the color interesting and beautiful to you? And is the last one is, does it have interesting shapes, and do the shapes have a relationship? And what I mean by that, by having 3 palm trees, I'm creating a relationship. You know, here's daddy, mommy, and child. So these actually have, the shapes are repeated, which creates a relationship. So you have a possible 10 points for this painting. You get to use any subject, any subject, any subject you want, as long as it has water as the subject part of it. And then with this, you have to do that little thumbnail, don't forget that. So if you're unable to attend class, make sure you photocopy or not photocopy, photo text that sheet to me, because that's your grade sheet. The second sheet that you will be doing will be a sample sheet like this, and I'm going to actually demonstrate these samples, but you will do your own little sample sheet on this piece of paper, or you can use watercolor paper or any kind of paper you want. This is just regular photocopying paper, so it's really thin. It's not very good, like your watercolor paper, but you can use it for your techniques. So you will start off by doing these 6 techniques are going to be required for this painting, our painting number 2. In your syllabus, which you will get, you can get it online or you can get a hard copy of it. I'm just going over the things we just said, plus what you will get also 5 points for when you are researching an artist. I want you to get on the internet and pick out an artist that you like, and you're going to write just a very short few sentences, and you can have that at the bottom of this page. And there's several things you want to include about this artist, and you can pick any artist you want, but you need to write 5 sentences. The artist's name, when they were born, when they died, if they have died, and I want you to actually take a picture of their work, and if you can't take a picture and include that, you could do a little sketch of their work. State what you liked about this, what you would do differently. So there's 5 points for doing this. So I want you to study those 5 points and make sure. Very simple. This is not an essay. It can be 5 sentences, but it's getting you to see what other artists are doing. So now for more of our subject matter, water. So for example, I did a little thumbnail of a palm tree scene, and so here is kind of some of the sequences when practicing about this, doing this palm tree. You know, here is crayon resist. Here is some crayon resist. Here are some of the other techniques we're going to be talking about. So even though that this isn't finished, I wanted you to see a painting in progress. So I started with very simple washes, which we talked about in lesson number 1, how to have color flow. Now here you can see the water was very wet. The paper had a lot of water, and so the water made the paper very wet, and so it's more runny. If you don't want it as runny, you always use less water. That's kind of the secret with watercolor. Here I used very little water, and you can see the stripes are much more predominant. So you have to decide right away with every area you're doing. Do you want the colors to stand up by themselves, be separated? Do you want them to run together? And that's simply determined by the amount of water that you use. For our first technique, going back to referring to this handout, the first technique is here using 3 different kinds of brush work or brush strokes. And this is a very simple one because you just use 3 different types of brushes. Because each brush is going to create a different look. So for example, a wide brush like this is going to create a wide stroke like this. A skinny brush can create a skinnier line. A little rounder brush can create a different line. So your brushes are all going to create a different type of stroke. So when you can see some of these, you can almost tell what kind of brush I use. Here's a bigger brush, here's a skinnier brush, here's a fatter brush, here's a much skinnier brush. So with your brushes, this helps you get acquainted with what your brush can do. So are you going to use the brush on the side? Are you using the tip of the brush? So I want you to think about, don't use a big brush when you want a small shape. Use a small brush. Now, of course, these brushes can be used on the side. So here, this is called a flat brush because it has a flat shape here. So I can use it this way. I can use it this way, so I can get a variety of lines. So that would already count as 2 lines, but I don't want to just use one brush. I want to have some variety of brushes and some shapes, and I can twirl this around, swirl it around. And that's a very good example for 3 types of brush work. There's not a trick with that. The idea behind this is to start experimenting with the brushes you have and other brushes so you get a nice variety of shapes using your brushes. We don't want it to all look like the same type of brushwork. The next one here is dry brush. So I'm going to have you zoom into this so you can see a dry brush. And dry brush is exactly what it means. You are using a very dry brush. It can be really dry. And we're going to dip into some paint. So you can see my little palette over here. So I have some paint in my palette. So this white is called a palette. And since I'm using this very dry, I'm not going to really add any water to this. I'm going to leave my brush dry because the paint out of the tube already has some water in it. So with dry brush, I'm really and truly using this as a dry brush. I might need a little more paint. You might use a little tiny bit of water if you want, but we're really going for this very dry look. So you can see some examples here of dry brush. They all look different depending on the brush you're using. So what does this look like to you? Maybe some kinds of grass, a pheasant tail, part of a rock. You know, here maybe are some prairie grasses, part of the design. So it looks like dry brush, doesn't it? You can tell that it has a very dry feel. So that's technique number 2, dry brush. So you can see you're going to be doing that on this little rectangle right here. Now I'm going to see if this brush that I used earlier, if it's still wet and I want to use this for dry brush, I can simply blot out some of the water to make it really dry. And I can fan the brush out because I want to have some of the scraggly, brushy look. So that works. It's a little wetter than sometimes, but that's basically the idea for dry brush. Next, we're going to go to sprinkling. I love to use this technique of sprinkling, and you can see some examples here. You can use a toothbrush, you can use pretty much any kind of brush, but a brush that is stiffer and harder and drier is going to be easier to use. So we can use a brush like this. I mean, you could use an old house paint brush like this. And for this, I do need some water on my brush. So I'm going to get some water in my brush here, and I might dip into some other colors. I want to have some variety. So I do have, it's not dripping, but I can certainly tell that this has paint in it. It has plenty of paint in the brush. And I'm just going to segment this off so I can splatter or sprinkle, whichever you want to call it, on this little square here. So if this were dripping, I would get great big splatters. If it's dry, well, this is pretty wet because I'm getting bigger splatters. So this had a little more water than I thought, which is fine. That's the idea for sprinkling or splattering. So obviously, you don't want to go like this because the splatters will hit you in the face. We're making the brush go down towards the paper. You could do this with your finger, but then you get paint all over your hands. So I'm just using another handle of another brush to hit against to create the splattering. Now, I love splattering because you could use this in water. It could look like foam, the water splattering. You can use it in the sky. You can use it many ways. But this, we did the splattering on dry paper. Now, you could do splattering where I splattered on wet paper. And then the sprinkles or splatters start to fade out. I can let it dry, I can sprinkle on another color, I can splatter another color, I can splatter another color, so I can build up a lot of the splattering. I love this technique. You could use this in a million ways. Throughout the whole painting course, you're probably going to want to use splattering. So think about what brush. A harder, stiffer brush is better. A soft brush like this is very hard to get splatters because it's so soft it just bounces back. Or you want something that's going to have some resistance that's going to create some splatters for you. And don't be afraid to use many colors. I like the idea of sprinkling with many colors. For example, this background. Although it's not water, I wanted to show you most of this painting is done with splattering. So I used a plastic trellis on my painting first, and I splattered around it, and I did these flowers, mostly splattering. Then I went back with some lines, but here's splattering oranges, here's blues, grays, browns. So you might think about your painting could be predominantly splatters for this water assignment. So you think about what technique would apply to what you like. So that should answer your questions on splattering. And so the next one is lifting. And with lifting, this is also pretty self-explanatory. We're putting paint down, and while it's still wet, we're lifting it off. So for example, with this, I will put some blue down here. Now this only works while the paint is still wet. But sometimes in a painting you go, oh, that's too much blue, it's too much blue. You can lift it off, not all of it, but most of it right away. Look how much lifted off. So I'm just using a paper towel and I'm lifting areas off. Of course, like I said, you have to do this while it's wet. Once it's dried, it's very hard to lift it off. You can, because our watercolors are water soluble, so I could always go back in later and lift off an area. So this brown is very dry here. So what I'd have to do to lift this off, it would take a lot of work, but I'm re-wetting this area and I'm going like this, and can you see that that brown is starting to lift? So you can always do that. With watercolor, you can always fix things. It's sometimes people think watercolor is difficult. It's only difficult when you haven't tried it. Try these ideas, have fun with them. You know, this should really be a fun time to do this class. That's why I want to share my love of art with you. So here I lifted this out. Now this is in our book. There's several things on page 112, on page 78, 79, 88, 89, page 45, page 53. There's all kinds of ways that you're going to want to use lifting. This will just be one of the tools you'll want to use. Here's another example. This was too strong, so I lifted out this area. So on your little sample sheet here, because we have to do this really fast, because on this paper this dries super fast. So I'm going to want to lift off an area right away. But look, that's lifting. So that's all you would need for that sample. Next, we're going to be using masking fluid. So masking fluid is a resist, and there's different brands like this that you can use. You could also use rubber cement. You can use anything that you're going to be able to rub off later when it's dried. And so there's many brands. There's Frisket and Mascoid and Resist liquids. With this, what we're going to do is we're going to brush on some of the Frisket, and here I've done some, and I let it dry, I painted over it, and then later I peeled it off. So it reveals the white paper underneath. So this is called a resist or a masking. So if I know from the beginning I want to save an area, this might be the perfect technique. So for example here, this is the Mascoid, our masking fluid. I have not rubbed it off. Here I put it on, painted the orange red over it, I let it dry, and then I can come back and see how I can peel this off. You have to rub it, rub, rub, rub. It's sticky, like glue, but can you see how I can rub that off? And then I can reveal the white paper underneath. The thing that is a negative with this it is really extremely hard on your brushes. So I like to use something that's disposable, like a twig. So I just put some of this masking fluid in a lid so you could see it. And it usually comes in yellow so you can actually see what you're doing instead of just a clear. And then I would have to let this dry, which takes about 10 minutes. So we're not going to wait for this. But after that's dried, then I could go back and rub it off. So you can, depending on your brush or your twig, or if you're going to use your finger, that would determine the shape of the area you're masking out or you're making a resist. I can also then, even later, I can go over that area and paint over it with another color. So now we're starting to layer these ideas. You can do this underneath, let it dry, do another color over on the top of it. You could do splattering on top of this. Now, the maskoid or masking fluid only works on dry paper. If you put it on wet paper, it just starts to smear all over the place because it doesn't have anything to stick to. So just remember that, always use it on dry paper. If you had a certain area of water that you really wanted to save, you want to make sure, okay, I can get that back to white, but I'm going to cover all this area with blue, you might do that first. So, for example, this is the beginning of a waterfall. So this was done, all these lines underneath were done with maskoid or masking fluid, dried, painted over, and then I've already rubbed off the masking fluid. So it's an easy way to create lines. Instead of me having to paint over around each one of these little lines, little lines, little lines, the lines are already there for me. So now I'm ready to enhance this. I could do splattering, I could do sprinkling on top of this, but I already have this sense of the water flowing. So here's some more, another development of the waterfall using some of this we've talked about, dry brush. Here is our crayon resist, which we're going to talk about next. Here is some dry brush. Here's some masking fluid, some of those little lines. Now you may wonder about this little kind of scratching here. We haven't done this technique yet, but this is once the paper is totally dry, you can go in with a razor blade and actually scratch through the paper, creating nicks in the paper that show the white of the paper. And we're going to be talking about that later, but you're welcome to use that now too. So you can see, back to our little sample sheet here, that this still has not dried. So just know, once you do that first, you have to let it dry until you can actually feel if it's dry or not. Let it totally dry, and then you're going to paint over it, and then later you're going to peel this off. So if you don't have masking fluid, you could use rubber cement, you could use different kinds of glues that are going to rub off. Elmer's does not work because it's a glue and it sinks right into the paper. Okay, our last technique is wax resist. So we've already been talking about resist because this masking fluid is a type of resist, but wax resist is so much fun. So what you do actually with a crayon or wax crayon, candles, anything that has wax in it is going to create a resist. So here I've drawn on this paper with different colors of crayon, and then I've gone over it lightly with another color, but these still show through. So this is a crayon resist. So for example, I'll do it with this crayon. So this would be great in the sky, it would be great for your water. Now I don't want to put so much color over this that it's going to actually cover up that yellow. And see how the wax in the crayon resists the watercolor. And you get these wonderful techniques that this would be impossible to paint with a brush. But look at this. Some of the paint is actually going over the crayon, but most of it is resisting. So you could use the crayon on the side, like I did here. This was a light pink. So I'm now painting over that, but the resist is still showing. Here I'm using different colors of crayon, but they're still showing through. This might be a place where you would do a lot of line work. It could be your signature. Here's my name. My last name is Noyes, N-O-Y-E-S. So I did it with a crayon, but then I painted over it. These are all little resist marks. So if I paint over it a lot, those lines aren't going to show very much. If I paint over it lightly, like here, it's going to show quite a bit. So those are the six techniques that we're using for the water assignment. So you may ask yourself, okay, what should I do first? What I think you should do first is figure out what painting you want to do. What's your water going to be? Is it going to be a palm tree with water down here? Is it a glass of water? Is it the ocean? Is it a rainy day? Something that you love, something you would like to do. So figure out a little thumbnail. Doesn't have to be perfect, but it starts to get your ideas kind of rolling around and thinking, oh, maybe I want more palm trees, or maybe I don't like palm trees, I'd like a boat here or something. As long as it has an element of water, you'll be fine. So think about that, and then go ahead and do your research on an artist where you're figuring out the many things you need to do with the artist. So those are finding an artist, their name, birth date and death date, state the title of their piece that you picked, include the photo, a little sketch, or actual photo would be the best. State why you liked that piece or you didn't like it. And then the last thing is, what would you do differently if you were the artist? So that's, I think, number 2. It will get your mind really going on what you want to do. And then step number 3, go ahead and do these techniques. So you're comfortable with these and that you love these, and you can practice on many pieces of paper. You can practice on the back of some watercolor paper, whatever you want to do. But getting these where you enjoy those is going to make it so easy for you to use. So then once you have these techniques down and you're comfortable with those, then you can actually start on your big piece of paper. And you could sketch it in, or you could actually say to yourself, okay, I think what I need to do first is, if I'm going to do some palm trees, I might draw them in with a wax resist. And I might have some wax resist lines in the water, because those lines are going to show up later, and that's also very helpful for sketching. Now, if you want something very precise, I would suggest you draw your sketch in on your full-size paper, lightly in a pencil. But as you're practicing these techniques, hopefully you've already started to think, oh, I could do splattering in the sky, I could do splattering in the water. You're automatically going to use several kinds of brushes. It's almost impossible, and actually very boring, to use the same brush throughout a whole painting. Big brushes for big shapes, little brushes for little shapes. Okay, dry brush, where would I use that? Could that be in weeds or reeds, around the water? So you automatically start to think where you might use these. And of course you can do more than one painting for this assignment, because once you've done these techniques, the painting goes pretty fast once you have your ideas. So practicing this ahead of time is really worth doing, and then we'll develop this. So in this class you will be doing 7 paintings. So this is painting number 2. Of course you can incorporate other things you've done in this class from assignment number 1, some of those techniques. So this is Julia Noyes. I just want to thank you so much for taking this class. So this was number 2, our lesson, using water. Hope to see you in class. Thank you.